The picture of peace, he was calm as a button. On the other hand, not everything was painted with soft lines. When Bob Ross was 52, he said something that broke the picture he had worked so hard to keep up for decades. It wasn't yelled from the roofs. It wasn't on TV. But it proved what some people had been thinking in secret the whole time. It's not just a cute little tree or a soft voice on PBS. It's about a name that turned into a brand and a memory that might not be with the person who cared about it the most. There is a secret confession, a final refusal, and a question that keeps coming up in this story that are louder than any brushstroke. There was no show with the truth. It showed up when there were no cameras around. What did Bob Ross really leave behind? Also, who still has the brush? Bob Ross carefully guards his reputation. Many people watched Bob Ross's show The Joy of Painting because of more than just his art. They liked his voice, his attitude, and his message of peace. Ross always gave off an air of peace, patience, and happiness with his soft-spoken advice, like don't make mistakes, just happy accidents. He made art seem like something anyone could do, adding to the idea that art wasn't just for pros. His character became linked to peace, and for many, watching his show was a way to relax from the stress of everyday life. But the Bob Ross that people saw on PBS was only one part of the real person. It was much harder for Ross to handle things when he wasn't on camera. He had been in the US TV force for years and was known for being a strict leader, which was very different from how nice he was on TV. That past shows a level of discipline and intensity that didn't always match up with how he was portrayed on TV. Ross's change from a strict military officer to a caring art teacher is both inspiring and a hint at how carefully he chose to present himself to the public. It wasn't fake, but it had been carefully put together. Ross cared a lot about keeping up that image, and it showed in how he handled his personal and business relationships. Bob's friends and co-workers noticed that he avoided public drama and preferred to handle work issues in a quiet way. When it came to the business side of his job, he almost never talked about differences or failures. Because of this, a lot of people didn't know about the inner struggles and sacrifices he had to make to keep up the happy world he made on screen. It wasn't lying, it was a conscious effort to keep the focus on innovation and hope at all costs. Up until recently, not many people in public were sure what was hidden behind closed doors. Not until after he died did stories about his life start to come out. These stories included lawsuits and many kinds of lies, which helped people get a better idea of Ross's life. There is a sense of dissonance between the calm artist and the troubled person who deals with stress, loss, and manipulation in secret. Even the biggest fans had doubts about it. What else was going on behind that calm face? And how much did people really know about the man behind the easel? A quiet storm had been growing behind the soft brush strokes and wise words. Bob Ross couldn't keep it to himself for long. It took him years to tell the story. Bob Ross supposedly told people close to him not long before he died at age 52 that his relationships with Annette and Walt Kowalski were beyond repair. Fans thought of the Kowalskis as loyal partners who brought the joy of painting to people's lives. But Bob's confession raised more questions about their intentions and their power over his memory. His son, Steve Ross, says that this wasn't just an argument about business. It was the last straw for a man who had spent years carefully crafting Harmony's public image. Bob's unease didn't just come out of the blue. Tensions with the Kowalskis are said to have grown over time because of disagreements over who owned his name, who had artistic control, and how his image could be used for commercial purposes. Still, Bob didn't tell many people about his anger. He decided not to talk about the problems in their relationship in public for years. Ross didn't say anything, either out of loyalty, fear of hurting his image, or just to avoid a fight. But as his health got worse, the need to protect his family and leave a lasting legacy pushed him to face the truth he had been avoiding for too long. The so-called statement was more than just a person airing their grievances. It changed what people had thought for decades about Bob's business connections. Steve Ross says that in his last few months, Bob was strongly against the Kowalskis' growing attempts to take full control of Bob Ross Incorporated, mainly his name and image. It seems that the fact that he confessed right before he died of cancer made things even more urgent. Bob's unwillingness to sign over his rights, even though he was very sick, showed that there was a lot of mistrust going on behind the scenes. Bob Ross never talked about his problems in public, but Steve Ross used the documentary Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and agreed to talk about what his father had told him. The story that many fans used to accept has been called into question by these. Did the Kowalskis want to honor Bob's memory or use it to make money at his expense? Why did this part of Bob's story take so long to become public? The statement was a turning point not only in how we understood Bob's last years, but also in how we thought about who really cared about his interests. A relationship turned into a battle for power. Bob Ross inquiry began as a shared idea between Bob Ross, his business partners Annette and Walt Kowalski, and a small group of people who wanted to make art more accessible to everyone. In the beginning, the business was just a way to get instructional materials, painting tools, and Ross's TV show to people. With Bob's soothing personality and one-of-a-kind way of teaching, the joy of painting quickly became a hit, gaining national attention and leading to business opportunities that none of them had planned for at first. There was trouble within the company as the name grew, though. The Kowalskis saw Bob Ross incorporated more and more as a business empire, while Ross kept his focus on artistic expression and education. There was tension behind the scenes because of these different objectives. Ross was said to have felt unhappy with how his name and image were being used for profit, especially in ways that were not related to his original goal. People who knew him well say that he started to wonder if the company still stood for the things he believed in or if it had changed into something else. In the beginning, they worked together to see how the relationship grew over time. Kowalski owned the company name and structure because the balance of power became so unfair. Ross had few legal options because he was and still is the face and heart of the brand. They then went even further to make their power clear by setting up licensing deals and even giving away all intellectual property with the name Ross. Because of this, Bob had almost no control over how his identity was being used and sold while he continued to film episodes and be the public face of the business. Ross is still fighting cancer, but the battle for Bob Ross Incorporated has become more personal for him. Steve Ross and other insiders said that the fight hit its peak during Bob's last year, when full legal rights over his name were said to have been sought. There was already a clear break in a relationship that seemed to be based on equal respect because of the stress. The change from an artist's voice to a tightly controlled business was, of course, a Elliputeri-style ch all about the constant strain Bob himself could no longer ignore. There were rumors, partnerships, and an odd affair. There are a lot of rumors about Bob Ross's friendship with the Kowalski family. One of the more controversial ones is that Bob and Annette Kowalski were dating. Speculation about this affair was made public by Steve Ross in the Netflix documentary Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed. He said that his father had an affair with Annette. The Kowalski family has strongly rejected the claim, and there is no solid proof to back it up. Still, the idea of such a relationship has made people look more closely at how power works in Bob Ross Incorporated. It doesn't matter if the affair really happened or not, it has had an effect. Any personal involvement could have made it harder to make business choices in a tightly controlled setting that was already tense from disagreements about ideas and money. It might have caused emotional leverage or blurred boundaries in ways that changed how business was done if it was true. The rumor itself caused distrust and tension, especially between Steve Ross and the Kowalski family in the years after Bob's death, even if it turned out to be false. Then, one has to wonder about when and what kind of claim was made. Why did this information come to light so many years later? What does the length of the delay say about how private Bob's personal and work relationships are? Steve's sharing of this piece of information seems to have helped with the overall work to get his father's story back. And bring attention to what he saw as dishonest behavior from those who knew Bob's quiet would help them. For some, it made it even harder to tell the difference between business partnership and personal loyalty. It also added another layer to Bob Ross, Inc.'s already complicated past. It's important to note that this alleged relationship has much less evidence to back it up than other theories. Doesn't have any evidence to back modeling any other way, and it never will. In any case, it will change how people think about the Kowalski family's part in Bob's life. Some fans who always thought the partnership was strictly business have started to wonder what kind of personal relationships might have been going on behind the scenes. Also, rumors have made the legal and moral fights over Bob Ross more emotional, and they've made a lot of people wonder what else is hidden behind the smiling artist's exterior that we thought we knew. The fight over who Bob Ross is. As Bob Ross's lymphoma got worse, one of the most important and upsetting events in his last months was the fight over who owned the rights to his name and picture. Steve Ross says that the Kowalskis tried to get Bob to sign a contract that would give them full legal power over his identity when he was at his weakest. Bob apparently said no, which made Steve say it was one of the few times he had ever seen his dad get visibly angry and yell, "I'm not giving you my name." This fight was one of the most important in the fight over his reputation. Bob's refusal wasn't just based on feelings, it was also a plan. He knew how important his name was, not just as a brand, but also as a sign of what he stood for, art that was easy for everyone to understand, kindness, and personal expression. It would have been against everything he had built to give away that name, especially when he was under a lot of stress during a medical emergency. Later, Steve Ross said that the stress and sadness that his father was feeling because he was about to die were made worse by the pressure that was put on him in those last days. Even after Bob died, the court case did not stop. For their part, the Kowalskis claimed that most of what Bob made was done as work for hire, which gave them full ownership rights over everything. Even though Bob wouldn't sign off on the papers, Bob Ross Incorporated kept using and licensing his picture and character. Steve Ross and all of those other family members took these claims to court, but they were only able to get very little help because of how the company was set up legally. Steve lost a big lawsuit in 2019, which meant he could no longer use his father's name to get things, or keep it from being used for business purposes, which he didn't agree with. This fight over who Bob is has turned into one of the worst parts of his legacy. A lot of fans who liked the artist because he was humble and kind are now being asked to think about whether the way his name is used now shows those qualities. Because of the court battle, Bob Ross's name, voice, and likeness could all be kept separate from the beliefs that led to them. This is still a bitter outcome. More questions are brought up by it. Who gets to decide what a legacy is? What about a name that is only on paper? Does it still hold the spirit of the person it stands for? While the court case over Bob Ross's identity was going on, there was another battle going on in the background, this one much closer to home. The son was torn between his memories and his loss. One of Bob Ross's only known children, Steve Ross, had more than just the same last name as his father. They were very close because they both loved art. Steve was a certified Bob Ross teacher and sometimes appeared on The Joy of Painting. They seemed to have a strong bond from the outside, with Steve following in Bob's artistic path. Behind the scenes, though, their relationship was tense and had times when they didn't talk about how they felt about each other, especially when it came to Steve's parents' expectations that he would carry on their tradition. Steve has said out loud that it was hard for him to deal with the pressure of being seen as Bob's likely successor. He wanted to do art his own way, while Bob, who was getting close to the end of his life, hoped Steve would play a bigger part in keeping the Joy of Painting brand going. Reports say that their different points of view caused them to fight and even go years without talking to each other. Later, Steve said in the Netflix documentary that he still feels guilty about that distance, especially during his father's last years, when Bob was sick and having a harder time protecting his legacy. Even though they had a fight, Steve and Bob made up before Bob died. Even though the reconciliation may have been important, it happened under a lot of legal and mental stress. In the last few years of Bob's life, Steve was more involved in his life because he was both a son and one of the few people Bob really trusted to protect his artistic ideals. In the future, Steve talked about how seeing how other people treated his father changed the way he thought about people his father used to feel about his partners. The unwilling heir turned into a supporter of the father in those works. Another big part of Steve's story is how he fights for the memory of great painters and artists. And one question that comes up is, who really takes on a legacy? Those who have a legal right or those who have a personal connection? Steve Ross has been in a tough spot since Bob's death. He is deeply connected to his father's identity, but he and his younger half-brother Roberta can't legally or financially do anything about it. He lost his case against Bob Ross Incorporated, so he can't make money off of his father's name or image. Steve still teaches drawing, but he says he does it while still being angry about something that could have been saved if things had gone differently. His story not only shows how much he lost, but it also brings up bigger questions about who has the right to carry on a legacy, those who have a formal claim or those who have an emotional connection to it. The claim that Bob Ross may have fathered a child while he was a teenager is one of the least well-known and least talked about parts of his personal life. Bob or his estate have never confirmed this idea, and there are no public records that prove the name or existence of such a child. But different reports and rumors have been going around for years, making people wonder about a part of Ross's early life that he purposely kept secret. If this were true, it might not go against the public picture of Bob Ross as being kind, quiet, and very private. But it would add another layer to the picture of a man who was very picky about what the public could see. Ross never talked about this supposed child in public, even after he became famous. This suggests that he may have chosen to keep some parts of his past secret from the public. He took care of other personal issues, like his health and business problems, in a quiet way and on his own terms. We are still not sure if this reported child later showed up in Ross's life, either in real life or in his imagination, or if either of them ever tried to get in touch or make peace. There are claims that this person has been in a legal dispute, but they have never made their own comments or been interviewed. People guess, but Ross's silence speaks to a deeper truth about him. He kept the line he drew between his public role as a teacher and entertainer and his private life safe until the very end. Since this part of the Bob Ross story has not been proven, it is still purely speculation. But even though it's not a confirmed part of Ross's life story, it helps to build a picture of him as a person. Like a lot of famous people, he may have kept some things about himself from the public eye. These things may now reveal the truth about his character. Rumors about this supposed child make the case stronger that Ross had parts of his life that were kept secret before he became known as a soft guide with a paintbrush and a soothing voice. Illness, abuse, and the end of life. As Bob Ross got closer to the end of his life, his fight with lymphoma took place while he was under a lot of personal and professional stress. Ross was diagnosed in the early 1990s, but he kept working even though his health was getting worse. There were no signs of his illness on TV. He kept up his happy attitude and kept painting with a steady hand and soft voice. Behind the scenes, though, his health was getting worse, and those closest to him knew that time was running out. During this time, the fight over who would control his reputation grew stronger. Ross was dealing with a disease that could kill him and increasing pressure from his business partners at the same time. Based on what Steve Ross said, this included the Kowalskis' repeated efforts to get full legal rights to Bob's name and likeness. These attempts, which were supposedly made while Bob was weak physically and emotionally, upset him. Steve remembered that his dad got very angry and agitated during these last few months, which wasn't like him at all. He was stressed out from court threats and constant phone calls at a time when he needed peace. It was hard for Bob Ross to keep working on his art when things were getting harder. When he was really sick, he would still paint, shoot TV shows, and talk to the viewers. Those last works, which were made while the artist was dying and there was a power struggle at work, turned into more than just landscapes. In a quiet way, they became acts of resistance. Ross was in charge of his life thanks to his work. He plans to keep teaching and making beauty for as long as he can, which shows a deeper strength. Even though some people tried to change what his memory meant for their own reasons. Ross died on July 4, 1995. He was 52 years old. Many people were sad about the death of a kind artist, but not many knew about the terrible storm he had been through in his last year. One of the most sobering parts of his story is the stark contrast between his public grace and his private battle. Looking back, the order in which the different legal actions related to his illness happened brings up some pretty bad moral problems. Was it enough to honor his goals while he still had the power to do so? And how much of what happened after that would have been different if he hadn't had to deal with business issues in his last days? The Kowalskis' growth and complaints from fans. Walt and Annette Kowalski continued to run Bob Ross Incorporated after Bob Ross died in 1995. They eventually gave their daughter Joan Kowalski control of the business, which she did by radically growing its presence in the market. Bob Ross grew into more than just a romantic TV character with Joan's help. His picture was on socks, pancake makers, and a lot of other things. The brand became more popular in pop culture, and through viral videos and branded products, it reached younger people. This aggressive marketing approach brought Bob Ross to the attention of a new generation, but it also led to more and more criticism. Longtime friends started to wonder if the commercial use of his image was in line with the values he stood for, which included being humble, easy to talk to, and loving art for its own sake. A lot of people were upset that his family, especially his son Steve Ross, doesn't get anything from the continued use of Bob's name or work. This backlash got worse when the Netflix documentary Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed showed the family's legal fights and raised ethical concerns about the company's control over his legacy. Because of the documentary, Bob Ross Incorporated has made a public statement defending their activities against the claims made by Steve Ross. They said over and over that they were responsible for keeping Bob's legacy living and spreading his message. But for many watchers, the legalities don't get to the heart of the matter. Fans who used to find comfort in Ross's company were upset that his image was being used for business purposes, even if it meant losing his son's voice and vision. Some fans responded by calling for boycotts and petitions to get Steve Ross's rights back. There was also a bigger debate about who really owns a legacy. Even if Bob Ross Incorporated gets a lot of money off of the brand, it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. Through growth, the company may have made Bob's image more well-known, but it also raised the question. Is it better to be seen if it doesn't cost something that goes against the artist's beliefs? Because of this, a lot of people are worried about the real problem in the argument, which is respect. Some critics say that the brand's change under Joan Kowalski shows not only growth but also a new start. That focuses more on making money than being true to the art. Bob Ross's picture has been used for a lot of different things, from themed board games to weird product tie-ins. Some people see this as a nice tribute, but others see it as a change that takes away from the simplicity and earnestness that made him famous in the first place. The real problem isn't socks or lunchboxes, it's whether a tradition based on honesty and stability can last in a system that values being seen over being heard. There was one question that kept coming up over and over again as the reaction got louder and the goods got heavier. Who really deserves to be remembered for Bob Ross? Who really has Bob Ross's spirit? At the heart of the current discussion about Bob Ross's legacy is a basic question. Who should be able to decide how people remember him? The law says that Bob Ross Incorporated owns his name, brand, and intellectual property. But on an emotional level, many of his fans say that his real legacy lies in the values he stood for, such as peace, encouragement, and the joy of making art. This difference between what the law says and what people feel has grown bigger in the years since Ross's death. Especially since attempts to sell merchandise and build his brand have made him more well-known in pop culture. Some people who don't like Bob Ross Incorporated say that the company's use of his name has moved away from what Ross would have wanted. Many novelty items, like energy drinks and Halloween outfits, are being sold, which they say goes against his quiet, honest personality. People who work for the company say that their efforts have brought Ross's lessons to new generations and kept them alive. But this brings up a bigger problem. Does being seen alone mean having a legacy? It's important to remember someone, but is seeing them often enough? Fans, like Steve Ross, are on the other side of the argument. They think that Bob's work has been harmed by unneeded legal issues that aren't related to the emotional core of it. People who think Steve should be taking care of Bob are upset that he can't make money off of or control how his father's name is used. People came together to support a legacy based on artistic freedom, family, and honesty instead of trademarks and licensing contracts after he was in the Netflix documentary. The long-running argument about Bob's legacy isn't just about who owns it. It has to do with meaning. It's not just about who owns the rights. It's also about who is responsible. Is it more important for the artist to make money than to be respected? Or will it live on in the life-changing inspiration it gave to millions of people? People now know more about this case than ever before, but there may never be a real answer. So, maybe the best thing about Ross isn't a product or a deal, but the fact that his soft voice still inspires people to sit down with a brush and paint without fear. Legacy can be both holy and useful, which is an uncomfortable truth that the war has brought to light in many ways. Fans have taken on the role of emotional guardians, questioning not only who should profit but also how the heritage is presented. Bob Ross Incorporated is in charge of the legal side of things. Is it a tribute to Ross's values or just a watered-down version of what he said to sell t-shirts and mugs? There is a risk to both image and personal safety when the lines between tribute and transaction are blurred. This is especially true for people who saw Ross as more than a brand. It's even more complicated by the fact that Bob Ross has been able to stay living thanks to the internet in ways that no company could fully control. People share clips of his show without his permission. Artists say that he inspired them. Memes and fan art change how people see him in their own unique ways. Legacy control has moved from courts to society in this digital age. In that case, maybe, just maybe, the real owner now lives there. It's not in court papers, but when someone picks up a brush in the evening. They play an old episode and feel like they're not alone for a moment. If this movie changed the way you think about Bob Ross and the story behind the smile, please click like to help the channel. Do you have any ideas about what happened? Write something below. All of them are being read. Sign up now so you don't miss what's coming up. Click the next movie on your screen if you want to keep going. What we found there is something you won't want to miss.